Well, it's been a long road getting from there to here. Yes, there is a song in there somewhere, you're correct. You'll notice the last couple of weeks it's been a little bit quiet as far as WARNO goes on the channel, and like many people I'm sat patiently waiting for these big updates or changes to the game mechanics to see exactly what it's going to do for the game one way or another. So WARNO videos will make a big resurgence at some point, but it's just a little bit quiet right now. And it's no good me making guides or deck building videos if everything is going to change significantly in a month or two, because then my videos are pointless and I've wasted a lot of time making them. And in a similar vein, the top players aren't playing as much of the game. Because like anything in life, if you spend many hours perfecting your skills in something only for it to then completely change, it can be quite frustrating. So, of course, they're not putting in as many hours as they will once this changes, and therefore there'll be more to cast, shall we say. Though there will still be some kind of 1v1 tournament this month from SD League, I'm sure. And not forgetting the guys over at War Yes who are doing a 2v2 tournament. But enough on that for now. Let's rewind the clock to the original release of Early Access for WARNO. Over a year ago now, we were introduced to the spiritual successor of the wargame franchise. Yes, it was carefully worded not to be a sequel to those games, and also not to be an offshoot of the Steel Division series. And from the get-go, as noted by other people, WARNO has, as a result, in some way struggled for its own identity, its own place in the Eugen catalogue. Compounded by the fact that, as we all know, Eugen has quite a passionate, as they call it, fan base. We all know what they actually mean by that. SD2 players want SD3, Wargame players want Wargame 4, and WARNO has spent the better part of a year trying to appease both sides in some way, shape or form. And with these upcoming changes, has that actually changed anyway, or is it still the same? Put a big question mark there. But anyhow, I digress. So we started with the bare bones and plenty of bugs and nothing unexpected from an early access game, and I strongly pushed the fact originally that this was proper early access, not just a beta test by some big company as many people expect these days, thanks all the big publishers who do these early access betas that kind of ruin the whole point of it. Anyhow, this is why I would not overly advise people to buy it. And if we think about other things that were the pushing point or selling point for the game at that stage, it's got to be the graphics, and they still are a pushing point to some extent. There's no denying WARNO is a very pretty game, but rarely do you actually zoom in the game that much when you're playing. Because at the end of the day, let's be realistic here, it's an RTS covering a large field of battle where you're trying to maneuver units around on a much bigger scale than just zooming in on one or two units. And as a side note, as we progressed towards the end of last year, the reality is more and more of us have been doing little videos and shorts showing off these graphics. Most of you can blame YouTube for that because they're really pushing this short stuff at the moment. And what else did we get? Well, we got an early access roadmap with a very tight schedule, which I suggested from the start was never going to stick. And well, no shock, it didn't. Weeks late became months late, and it led to a lot of frustration within the community. Now, Eugen were not trying to deceive anyone here, they just overpromised and underestimated how long some things would take to implement or create. They are a much smaller team than the days when they made Wargame Red Dragon, and there's also an element to the fact that they are persistent in their desire to work with their old bespoke tech, and that's another issue entirely, though they have relented to making models in more widely used software now, though how they port those into their engine remains a complete mystery, and will continue to leave modders wanting, I'm sure. Now you add this in with a group of people, a bigger, wider community that really won't understand the basis of game development and just has their own expectations, and eventually things just bubble up, and everybody on every side gets more frustrated. But it is what it is. That is game development in the modern era. So what did the year actually bring? Well, it brought a host of new maps to the game, including some that have different times of day. Once again, pushing those pretty graphics, guys. A total of 14 new divisions to the game for 16 in total, and the promise of another 2 divisions free for those who have purchased the game in early access. Towed weapon systems, something more familiar to Steel Division 2 players, and new weapons teams such as the HMG teams, which is actually also something from SD2 really, I suppose, though the ATGM teams are very much Wargame Red Dragon. And of course the long-awaited Destruction mode, which needs some income adjustments, but it is Destruction mode as we know and love it. And towards the end of the year, we got new details about the Army General campaign, and specifically the Oudinot milestone, and its Battle for Berlin, the 1989 edition. And then came the pause at the end of the year. Now, in fairness to the community, at the end of the day, all of this big pause started quite a bit before Christmas, and thus has left a bit of a bitter taste in a lot of players' mouths. The game was left over the holiday period with some serious balance issues when people would have been picking up the game on sale over that period. And the reality is, these things should have been hotfixed long before the holiday started. The SU-25, I'm really looking at you. As much as I love Eugen, sometimes they do really drop the ball. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that over the last year, WARNO has formed its very own community with a variety of tournaments played over the year, including a very good charity event run by our friends over at SD League, of course WARNO League Season 0 towards the end of the year, and tournaments also run by our friends over at War Yes, to name but a few, I'm sure. It's made for some exciting times in what has been otherwise a slow boil sort of rumbling progress of game development, proving once again that a community really can make a game shine, or at least certainly roll it in glitter, depending on how you want to look at it. So let's move on to the elephant in the room, shall we? No, not you, Dumbo, you stay there. The sudden big changes to the game's mechanics and the resulting pause in updates. So the big post came, we're going to completely change everything about combat and make it more realistic. Well, initially there were lots of excitement from this, or more, lots of screaming matches between different sides of the community, Wargame fans being upset about the commander changes, SD2 fans enjoying the fact that it seemed to be beating up on the Wargame fans' enjoyment of the game. And no matter what you say, no one will ever convince me that these two communities aren't as bad as each other when it comes to this type of stuff. And then came the realization that some of these new additions were actually lifted from Wargame, and a couple of them were lifted from SD2, and the shouting matches kind of died down pretty quickly. Because the reality was, it's back to square one, and WARNO just being WARNO. So what were these big changes anyway? Well, one of the big ones was unit traits. So placed on unit cards a lot like they were in SD2, with some of the actual concepts for traits taken from Wargame, some taken from SD2, and some brand new ones to make WARNO its own beast, shall we say. But it does add some welcome features that some of us have been asking for a while, such as, Special Forces additional training to make them last a bit longer in the fight. Other things like extra stealth for snipers when they're not moving, and of course the bonuses for mechanized infantry when they are alongside their fighting vehicle or a fighting vehicle of some kind. There is of course the change to how CVs will work to make them even more of a cross between Wargame and SD2 perhaps, and some planned changes to the game combat pacing. Okay, it's an extremely simplified list, but you can look at the dev blogs or my dev blog videos for more details on that. But the principle is there, it's to make some big adjustments to how the game will play. And what does this all do for the game? Well, I can't tell you. Until we have a public release and a hands-on, it's very much up in the air. One question I've seen come up a few times regarding the changes to command vehicles is, will these changes stop CV sniping? And I guess in my head I would say not really. I mean, at the end of the day you'll still need a CV in a contested zone, and therefore it can still be hit by RT or bombed by an aircraft and therefore sniped. And, what about the points at the back of the map? Well, I guess it gives heal or CVs a purpose to neutralize enemy rear points or indeed steal them, and perhaps people will be more incensed to put defensive units in those points, or maybe they won't, who knows. But at the end of the day, it remains that there are certainly more questions than answers around all of these changes. Now, going back to the beginning of this video when we talked about identity and WARNO's identity, do these changes give WARNO its own identity? And I think you could discuss that point to eternity, because whatever the outcome, it will still be a mishmash of features from Wargame and Steel Division, because at the end of the day, it's a Eugen game. But hopefully it finds a place it can settle and progress without the need for any more major overhaul. So where does WARNO go from here? Well, these changes will go live eventually along with the Udino milestone, and people will test them and give feedback, the good, the bad, the ugly, I'm sure. And I'd also like to note at this point, contrary to what a lot of people often suggest, Eugen do listen to the community. At times at least, and sometimes it's for the worse and sometimes it's for the better. Such is life, I guess. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we are now, waiting patiently or impatiently, as the case may be, for these changes to come to fruition. And I leave you with this very important message. 2023 is going to be an exciting year for RTS games. There are plenty on the horizon across a whole spectrum of styles and eras, from historic to sci-fi, from grand scale to small scale, and one way or other, it's going to be a very, very good year for us, the strategy gamers. As ever, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned to the channel. There will be more WARNO, more RTS in general, and plenty of other stuff on the channel this year. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you all soon.